8th December, 1943, 15 kilometers southeast of Kiev, Ukraine. The worst part wasn't the sound of the tracks grinding through frozen mud. It was the silence that came before it. That's when you knew they were hunting. I can still hear it. Even now, 82 years later, sitting in this quiet apartment in Hamburg with my grandson playing in the next room, I can hear that deep mechanical rumble that meant death was rolling toward you at 30 kilometers per hour. The T-34. The Soviets called it their guardian angel. We called it the devil's coffin on tracks. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began. Back when I was still stupid enough to think I'd survive. My name is Klaus Hartmann, and I was 19 years old when I first set foot in Russia. 19. Just a boy, really, though I thought I was a man. I'd completed my training at the infantry school in Potsdam 6 months earlier, and by November 1943, I found myself assigned to the 112th Infantry Division, 2nd Company, dug into defensive positions south of Kiev. The great German advance had stalled. We weren't pushing forward anymore. We were holding on. But nobody told us that. Or maybe they did, and we just didn't want to hear it. The cold hit me first. I remember stepping off that transport train in Zhytomyr, and the wind cut through my greatcoat like it was made of paper, minus 20 degrees Celsius. The veterans around me just laughed at how I wrapped my scarf tighter. "Wait until January," one of them said. His name was Obergefreiter Werner Stahl, a Berliner with a crooked nose and eyes that had already seen too much. This is summer weather compared to what's coming. We were transported by truck to our sector, a collection of trenches, bunkers, and reinforced positions carved into the frozen earth near a village whose name I never learned. The locals called it something in Ukrainian that sounded like broken glass. To us, it was just the position or the hole. 300 meters behind us sat our artillery batteries. A kilometer ahead, across a stretch of open farmland now buried under snow, was the Soviet line. I'll never forget my first night in the trench. The sound of distant artillery, constant and rhythmic like a heartbeat. The smell of unwashed bodies, tobacco smoke, and the latrine pits we'd dug 50 meters back. The way frost formed on the inside of the dugout where 7 of us slept in shifts. But more than anything, I remember the faces of the men around me. There was Werner, who'd been fighting since Poland in 1939. His hands never stopped shaking, but whether it was from cold or something else, I never asked. Georg Muller, a farm boy from Bavaria who talked constantly about his family's dairy cows and showed everyone the same photograph of his sweetheart at least 3 times a day. Hans Dietrich, our youngest at 17, who'd lied about his age to enlist and still had acne on his face. Feldwebel Kraus, our sergeant, a career soldier with 20 years of service who'd fought in the Great War and wore his Iron Cross First Class like a shield against the madness around him. And there was Horst. God, Horst, 6 feet tall, built like an ox, from Hamburg like me. We'd met during training and became friends immediately. He used to joke that when we got back home, we'd open a beer hall together and spend the rest of our lives getting fat and happy. I can still see him sitting on the fire step, cleaning his Karabiner 98K rifle with the same careful precision he did everything. "Klaus," he said to me that first night, "you stick close to Werner. Watch what he does. That man survived 2 winters here. He knows things." I nodded, trying to look confident, trying to be the soldier I'd been trained to be. But inside, I was terrified. Not of dying, necessarily. I was too young and stupid to really understand death yet. I was terrified of being afraid, of showing weakness, of letting down these men who all seemed so much harder, so much more capable than me. The first week passed in a blur of routine, standing watch in the pre-dawn darkness, your breath freezing in clouds around your face, scanning the white emptiness ahead for any movement. Breakfast was usually ersatz coffee, made from God knows what, and hard bread with a thin scraping of margarine. If we were lucky, some tinned meat or cheese. Lunch was whatever the field kitchen managed to bring up, usually some kind of soup or stew that was barely warm by the time it reached us. Dinner was the same. We spent our days reinforcing positions, carrying ammunition, cleaning weapons, and trying to stay warm. At night, we took turns on watch, 2 hours on, 4 hours off, huddled in the dugout or manning the MG-42 machine gun positions that covered our sector. The monotony was almost worse than the fear. Almost. It was on my 8th day that I first saw combat. December 15th, 1943. 05:30 hours. I was on watch with Werner, scanning the gray pre-dawn landscape through a trench periscope. The snow had stopped falling during the night, and everything was quiet. Too quiet, Werner kept saying. He'd learned to read the silence. Then we heard it. Artillery. Not ours. Theirs. The distinctive sound of Soviet Katyusha rockets, those Stalin's organs that turned the sky into a screaming nightmare. Werner grabbed me and threw us both into the dugout, just as the first salvo hit. If you've never experienced an artillery barrage, you can't understand it. The earth becomes liquid. The air becomes solid. You cease to exist as anything except pure animal terror pressed into the mud. The dugout shook with each impact. Dirt rained down from the logs above us. The oil lamp swung wildly, throwing shadows that looked like demons. Georg was praying in Bavarian dialect, words tumbling over each other. Hans was crying, though whether from fear or because the concussion had burst his eardrums, I couldn't tell. It lasted 20 minutes. 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. When it finally stopped, Feldwebel Kraus was already shouting, "To your positions! They'll be coming now! Move, move, move!" We stumbled out into devastation. Half our trench line had collapsed. The machine gun position to our left was just a crater filled with splintered wood and twisted metal. I saw something pink and red in the snow and realized it was what remained of Gefreiter Schultz, who'd been manning that position. I vomited. Right there, my breakfast steaming in the frozen air. "No time for that, boy!" Werner grabbed my shoulder, shoved me toward the fire step. "They're coming!" And they were. Through the smoke and snow, I could see them, hundreds of them. Soviet infantry in their brown padded coats, moving in waves across the open ground. I raised my rifle with shaking hands and fired my first shot in combat. I don't know if I hit anything. I just kept working the bolt, firing, working the bolt, firing like I'd been trained. The rifle's recoil against my shoulder felt unreal, like it was happening to someone else. Our MG-42 opened up, that distinctive buzzsaw sound cutting through the chaos. Tracers reached out like angry red fingers, finding targets, dropping them. The Soviets kept coming. More appeared from the smoke. How many were there? Where were they all coming from? "Grenade!" Werner shouted. A Soviet potato masher had landed in the trench 10 meters to our right. The explosion was muffled by the snow, but I heard someone screaming afterward. Screaming and screaming and screaming. The attack lasted 40 minutes. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The surviving Soviets withdrew, dragging some of their wounded, leaving others behind. The field in front of us was littered with bodies, dark shapes against the white snow, some moving, most not. We'd held. We'd survived. But at a cost. We'd lost 11 men from our company in that one morning, killed or wounded so badly they had to be evacuated. 11. Nearly a quarter of our strength. And the Soviets? I learned later they'd hit our entire divisional sector simultaneously. This was just one small piece of a much larger attack. That night, huddled in the dugout with the survivors, nobody spoke much. Georg didn't show anyone his girlfriend's picture. Hans had gone completely silent, staring at nothing. Horst sat next to me, and I could feel him trembling. Or maybe it was me trembling. We'd crossed some threshold that day. We'd seen what war really was, and there was no going back to who we'd been before. The attacks continued. Every few days, sometimes every day, the Soviets would probe our lines, testing for weaknesses. We learned to recognize the pattern. First, the artillery, softening us up, destroying positions, killing the unlucky. Then the infantry assault, waves of men trying to overwhelm us through sheer numbers. Sometimes they broke through. Then we'd have to counterattack, fighting hand-to-hand in the trenches, desperate and savage. Sometimes we held them back, but each time there were fewer of us. By Christmas, our company was down to less than half strength. Replacements arrived, boys even younger than Hans, fresh from training, terrified and useless. Most of them died within a week. You could see it in their eyes, that confusion, that inability to process what was happening around them. I probably looked the same way a month earlier, but now I was a veteran, a survivor, hard. I'd killed men by then. I knew I had because I'd seen them fall from my rifle fire, seen the way they grabbed at their wounds, the way they crumpled. I should have felt something, guilt, horror, triumph, but I felt nothing, just the determination to survive, just the cold mechanical process of loading, aiming, firing, loading, aiming, firing. Werner taught me everything. How to pack snow around your canteen at night so your water wouldn't freeze solid. How to read Soviet artillery patterns and know when to take cover. How to move through no man's land during night patrols without making noise. How to tell the difference between incoming and outgoing fire by the sound. How to stay awake on watch by biting your tongue until you tasted blood. How to keep your rifle from freezing by sleeping with it in your sleeping bag. How to eat frozen bread without breaking your teeth. He also taught me the unspoken rules of survival. Never volunteer for anything. Never be first in line or last. Don't make friends with replacements. They'll be dead within days, and it's not worth the pain. Don't think about home, because thinking about home made you careless, made you imagine a future that might not exist. Live in the present, this moment, this hour. Nothing beyond that. January 1944 came, and with it temperatures that dropped to -35. Men started losing toes and fingers to frostbite. Our weapons began failing, bolts froze, oil turned to sludge. We had to keep fires going constantly just to maintain our equipment. The Soviets attacked less frequently, but they never stopped completely. It was like they were slowly grinding us down, wearing away our strength like water wearing away stone. On January 20th, Feldwebel Kraus was killed by a sniper. One moment he was standing there, calling out assignments for the day, and the next moment he was on the ground with a hole in his forehead the size of a coin. Just like that. 20 years of service, all that experience, gone in an instant. Werner became our acting sergeant. By the end of January, I'd been at the front for 3 months. I'd aged a lifetime. My hands were scarred from barbed wire and frozen metal. My face was burned by wind and cold, with skin peeling off in sheets. I'd lost 15 kilograms. My uniform hung on me like it belonged to someone else. When I looked in the small mirror we kept in the dugout, I barely recognized the hollow-eyed stranger staring back. But I was still alive. Against all odds, against all logic, I was still breathing, still fighting. Horst was alive too, and Werner, and Georg, and even young Hans. Though he'd changed the most of all of us, he'd stopped crying and started laughing at inappropriate times, a high-pitched giggle that made everyone uncomfortable. I remember thinking during those long January nights that I'd made it through the worst, that I'd proven myself, that I'd earned my survival, that maybe, just maybe, I'd actually make it home. I was wrong. February 3rd, 1944, 14:30 hours. I was in the dugout trying to write a letter to my mother. It was the first letter I'd attempted in weeks. Not because I didn't want to write, but because what could I say? I couldn't tell her the truth. So I was crafting careful lies about how we were holding our positions, how morale was good, how I was staying warm and well-fed, standard lies that every soldier told his family. Werner burst in, his face white, not from cold, from fear. "Orders just came down," he said. "We're pulling back." For a moment, I didn't understand. Pull back? We'd been told to hold this position to the last man. We'd been told Kiev was vital to the defense of the Reich. We'd been told we were winning. When? Georg asked. Tonight. 2,200 hours. The entire division. The Soviets have broken through to the north and south. We're in danger of being encircled. Werner sat down heavily. They're trying to trap us. The whole German line is collapsing. Those words, the German line is collapsing, hit me like a physical blow. How was that possible? We were supposed to be the superior force. Better trained, better equipped. How could we be the ones running? But we were. At 2,200 hours, in the dead of night, we abandoned positions we'd held for 3 months. We destroyed everything we couldn't carry. Weapons, ammunition, supplies. We set fire to the dugouts. And then we started walking west, a long column of exhausted men shuffling through the snow, leaving behind our dead, leaving behind pieces of ourselves. The retreat was chaos. Units got mixed together. Officers tried to maintain order, but it was impossible. Thousands of men, all moving west, all trying to escape the trap that was closing around us. Soviet artillery followed us, shells dropping randomly into the columns, killing men who'd survived months at the front only to die running away. We walked for 3 days, barely stopping, barely eating, just walking, always walking, through abandoned villages and frozen forests, across ice-covered rivers and open steppes. Men collapsed from exhaustion and were left behind. Nobody had the strength to carry them. You just kept walking, one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant dying. On the 3rd day, we reached a town called Korsun, or what was left of it. The Germans had established a defensive pocket there, trying to organize a stand, trying to buy time for the army to regroup. That's where we were supposed to make our new position. But the Soviets were faster than we thought. February 6, 1944, just after dawn. I heard it first. That sound I'll never forget. Deep, mechanical, like thunder rolling across the earth. I was in a ruined building with Horst and Werner trying to get some sleep when the rumbling woke me. Werner sat up immediately. His face went gray. Tanks, he whispered. Not just any tanks, T-34s. We could tell by the sound of their engines that distinctive diesel growl, and from the volume of the rumbling, there were a lot of them. We ran to the window. Through the morning mist, we could see them coming, dozens of them, maybe more, spreading out in a line, their turrets swiveling like the heads of hunting predators. Behind them came infantry, thousands of Soviet soldiers, moving with the confidence of men who knew they'd already won. "We need to fall back," someone shouted. "Fall back to the secondary line." But there was no secondary line. There was just us, a collection of exhausted, undersupplied men with no anti-tank weapons worth mentioning. We had some Panzerfaust rockets, but not enough. Not nearly enough. The T-34s opened fire. Their 76mm guns barked and buildings exploded around us. A shell hit the house next to ours, and the entire structure collapsed into rubble. I saw men running out of it, some on fire, all screaming. "Move! Move now!" Werner was dragging me, pulling me away from the window, downstairs, out into the street. Horst followed. Georg appeared from somewhere, and Hans, and a dozen others I didn't recognize. We ran. The town was disintegrating. Soviet tanks were rolling through the streets, crushing everything in their path. German soldiers were trying to fight back, but it was hopeless. I saw one brave idiot run up to a T-34 with a magnetic mine, trying to plant it on the hull. The tank's machine gun cut him in half before he got within 5 meters. We made it to the edge of town, into a snow-covered field. Behind us, Korsun was burning. Ahead of us, more open ground. No cover, nowhere to hide, and the T-34s were following. "Spread out!" Werner shouted. "Don't bunch up!" We spread out and kept running. My lungs burned from the cold air. My legs felt like they'd turned to concrete. My pack was cutting into my shoulders, but I didn't dare drop it. It had my rations, my blanket, everything I needed to survive. Then I heard the worst sound in the world. The sound of tracks accelerating, getting closer. I looked back and saw one of the T-34s breaking away from the others, coming straight toward our group. Its turret turned, and I absolutely knew, it was aiming at us. "Down!" Werner screamed. The T-34's gun fired. The shell hit the ground 20 meters to our left, throwing up a fountain of frozen earth and snow. The explosion knocked me off my feet. My ears rang. Everything went white. When my vision cleared, I saw Horst lying on the ground 10 meters away. He wasn't moving. I crawled toward him, screaming his name, though I couldn't hear my own voice. When I reached him, I saw why he wasn't moving. A piece of shrapnel the size of my hand had gone through his neck. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Blood was pooling beneath him, steaming in the cold air. I don't remember what I did next. Werner told me later that I tried to drag Horst with me, tried to carry him even though he was dead, and Werner had to physically hit me to make me let go. All I remember is the T-34 getting closer, its engine roaring, its tracks churning up the snow. We ran. We abandoned everything. Our packs, our rifles, everything except the desperate need to survive. The T-34 chased us across that field like a cat chasing mice. Its machine guns chattered, kicking up snow around our feet. Men fell. I don't know if they were hit or if they just couldn't run anymore. I didn't look back. We reached a tree line and dove into it. The T-34 stopped at the edge, its engine idling, as if considering whether to pursue us into the forest. Then it turned and rumbled back toward the town, back to find easier prey. I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst through my ribs. Werner was next to me. Georg was there, crying. Hans was staring back at the field, at the bodies scattered across the snow, Horst among them. "We have to keep moving," Werner said. His voice was flat, emotionless. He'd retreated somewhere inside himself where the horror couldn't reach. "We can't stay here." "Where do we go?" I asked. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Werner didn't answer, because there was no answer. We were cut off, surrounded, hunted. The pocket was collapsing. The German army was being destroyed. And we were just 4 men alone in a forest in the middle of Ukraine, with Soviet tanks between us and safety. For the next week, we moved like ghosts through the winter landscape. We traveled only at night, hiding during the day in abandoned barns or snow-covered dugouts we dug with our hands. We had no food except what we could scavenge from destroyed vehicles or dead soldiers. We had no maps. We just kept moving west, following the stars, hoping we'd eventually find German lines. We saw horrors. Villages burned to the ground. Civilians caught between armies, starving, freezing, dying in the snow. German soldiers who'd been captured and executed, left in ditches as warnings. Soviet soldiers who'd been captured and executed, left in other ditches as different warnings. War had stripped away any pretense of civilization. We were animals now, all of us, predator and prey, killing and dying in the frozen wastes. On the 8th day, Georg couldn't walk anymore. His feet had frozen. We could see through the holes in his boots that his toes were black. Werner wanted to leave him, but I refused. We'd already left too many behind. So we carried him, taking turns, stumbling through the snow with his arms around our shoulders, listening to him apologize over and over for being weak, for being a burden. On the 9th day, we heard engines behind us. Soviet vehicles on the road we'd just crossed. They were hunting stragglers, mopping up survivors. We hid in a gully, buried ourselves in snow, and waited. The vehicles passed within 50 meters of us. We didn't breathe. We didn't move. We became part of the landscape, praying to a god most of us had stopped believing in. On the 10th day, Hans vanished. We'd stopped to rest in a barn, and when Werner and I woke up, Hans was gone. Just gone. No note, no sign. He'd walked away in the night. Whether he deserted or went mad or was captured, we never knew. Werner and I looked at each other, and we both knew we couldn't spare the time or energy to search. We had to keep moving. On the 11th day, we found them. German lines, or what passed for lines, a hastily established defensive position around a small town, manned by exhausted soldiers from a dozen different units, all mixed together, all that remained of the disaster at Korsun. When we stumbled up to the checkpoint, I expected to feel relief, joy, something, but I felt nothing, just emptiness. We'd survived, but what had we survived for? To fight more? To retreat more? To watch more friends die? Georg was evacuated within an hour, loaded onto one of the few remaining trucks heading west. His feet were so badly frozen they'd have to amputate. Werner stayed with the defense force. They needed every man they could get. I should have stayed too. But something in me had broken out there in the snow, watching Horst die, watching our army collapse, watching everything we'd been told fall apart. I walked away. I just started walking west, past the checkpoints, past the defensive positions, past the officers trying to organize what remained of the division. Nobody stopped me. Maybe I looked too dead already to bother with. Maybe they had bigger problems. I don't remember much of the next week. I have flashes. Riding in the back of a supply truck, sleeping in a barn with refugees, walking through a city whose name I never learned. Somehow, I ended up at a field hospital in Lviv. I wasn't wounded, not physically, but something in my eyes must have told the doctors I needed help. They diagnosed me with nervous exhaustion, which was the polite term for what we'd now call psychological trauma, or PTSD. They gave me 3 weeks of rest, hot meals, clean clothes, and a cot in a warm building. I slept for what felt like years. When I wasn't sleeping, I just stared at the walls, reliving it all. The sound of the T-34s, Horst's dead eyes, the endless retreat, the cold, always the cold. In March 1944, I was transferred back to Germany for recovery and reassignment. I never returned to the Eastern Front. Instead, I was assigned to a coastal defense unit in France. When the Allies landed in June, I was there. I fought again. I retreated again. In August, I was captured by the Americans near Falaise. I spent the rest of the war in a POW camp in England, which honestly felt like a vacation after the Russian front. I came home in 1946. My mother cried when she saw me, not from joy, but from horror at what had happened to her son. I weighed 53 kilograms. I had recurring nightmares. Loud noises made me dive for cover. I couldn't be around crowds. It took years of patience from my family and later from my wife to even begin healing. Werner made it home in 1947, released from a Soviet prison camp, though he never talked about what happened there. We met up once in 1953, had coffee, talked about nothing important, and never saw each other again. Some experiences you can only share with the people who lived them, but sometimes those people are the last ones you can bear to be around. Georg died in a veterans hospital in 1961 from complications related to his amputations and decades of phantom pain. I went to his funeral. His wife showed me that photograph he used to carry, the one of his sweetheart. They'd gotten married after the war, had 2 children. She was crying as she told me he still had nightmares every night, still woke up screaming about the cold. Hans? I never found out what happened to Hans. I've looked, asked around at veteran reunions, checked with the military archives. He just disappeared into the chaos of that winter like so many others. I hope he made it home somehow. I hope he found peace. But I don't know. Horst is buried in Ukraine somewhere, in an unmarked grave with hundreds of others. Or maybe his body was never recovered. Maybe he's still lying in that field where he fell. I think about that sometimes. My best friend, frozen in the snow, slowly becoming part of the earth he died on. Reflection. I'm 99 years old now. Most of the men I fought with are dead, from the war, or from age, or from the wounds that never healed, the ones you can't see. My wife passed 3 years ago. My children are retired. My grandchildren have children of their own. I've lived a long life, a good life, considering. I worked as a carpenter after the war, built houses, raised a family, paid my taxes, tried to be a decent citizen. I never joined veteran organizations or attended military reunions. I never talked about what I saw. Not really. When people asked about the war, I'd give vague answers and change the subject. But now, at the end, I find myself thinking about it more, not romanticizing it. I'm not one of those old fools who claim the war was glorious or meaningful. It wasn't. It was horror. It was waste. It was young men dying in frozen mud for causes they didn't understand, following orders from leaders who didn't care whether they lived or died. But it happened. It was real. And if I don't tell this story, who will? The history books will record the dates and battles, the grand strategy and major operations. But they won't tell you what it felt like to hear T-34 tanks rolling toward your position, knowing you had no way to stop them. They won't tell you what it smelled like when your friend died in your arms. They won't tell you how cold it gets when you're sleeping in a hole in the ground at minus 35 degrees. So I'm telling you now, not because I want sympathy, not because I want to glorify what we did, but because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to say their names. Werner Stahl, Georg Müller, Hans Dietrich, Horst Becker, and all the others whose names I've forgotten, but whose faces still haunt my dreams. War isn't glorious. It isn't heroic. It's chaos and terror and death. It's watching friends die. It's making decisions you'll regret for the rest of your life. It's surviving when better men didn't, and spending decades asking yourself why. When I heard those T-34s coming, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd die in that Ukrainian winter, just another casualty among millions. But I didn't. I survived. I came home. I lived. And now I'm telling you what that survival cost. Because the price of war isn't just counted in the dead, it's counted in the living, too. In the men who made it home but left pieces of themselves in frozen trenches and burning towns. In the families who got back sons and fathers and brothers, who weren't quite the same people who left. In the nightmares that never stop, the grief that never ends, the guilt that never fades. I thought I'd make it home alive, and I did. But sometimes I wonder if the boy who heard those T-34s rolling toward him, the boy who ran across that field while his best friend bled out in the snow, if that boy ever really made it home at all, or if he's still there. In that Ukrainian winter, running from something he can never escape. I suppose it doesn't matter now. In a few months or years, I'll be gone too, and this story will die with me, unless you remember it, unless you understand what I'm trying to tell you. War isn't glory. It's just death and cold and the sound of tanks in the distance. Remember that.